It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. In 1984, Wes Craven released the movie that would likely be what he will forever be remembered for, A Nightmare on Elm Street. What's interesting is that he already had The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, two of the most important and studied exploitation horror films from the 1970s. Later, he would once again reinvigorate his career with the Scream franchise, but it was the creation of Freddy Krueger that would more or less solidify Wes Craven as a horror master. And like with the 30s, the 80s were a time of a monster explosion for the big screen. Michael Myers was already established, but he would get 3 more turns on the big screen in the decade. Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, they were the great playground debate over which one was the better horror icon between my friends. The Tall Man and the Phantasm franchise would return before the end of the decade. Pinhead and the Cenobites would make their first 2 appearances in the decade. But when it was all said and done, it really did come down to Freddy or Jason. I think the camps were pretty evenly divided. People like Jason for how he dealt with camp counselors in a violent and quick way. Others liked Freddy for the fact that he attacked you in your dreams, not in the woods, and you couldn't escape him because he could control the environment. And that was scary for on a lot of levels because, that's when any living thing is at its most vulnerable, in the arms of a deep sleep. Now, the problem with Freddy, though, was that his evolution throughout the sequels were very hit or miss, at least for me. The second movie was the first one to try to make him an active participant in the real world by having him possess the body of a kid who was kind of an outsider. Now, that movie is worthy of its own discussion, as it has become a movie that is heavily touted by gay audiences for its themes and the lead star being a gay man in real life. The third one is maybe my favorite, as it's the one that I probably have seen the most. But once you get to the 4th, 5th, and 6th films, Freddy started to really kind of head down a downward spiral and get pretty annoying to me. He joked and quipped and made one-liners too often. What made him terrifying was kind of getting lost under the lighter tones and the fairly bad slapstick humor or the groan-worthy one-liners. But then along came 1994 and Wes Craven returning to the franchise. After directing the first film, the only other interaction Craven had with the series was co-writing the third film. 1991's 6th film, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, effectively ended the entire franchise by having Freddy's estranged daughter ultimately destroying him. And with this return, Craven had this interesting idea, which we will be digging into momentarily. Wes Craven's New Nightmare was released in October of 1994, and it was only nominally successful, making nearly $20 million against this $8 million budget. While it was relatively popular with some critics, after the release of Scream 2 years later, some reassessment was paid to this movie, setting this up as a sort of first run of bringing horror into a real-world setting after being popular in movies. So with that, let's find out what Wes Craven's big idea on how to bring back Freddy Krueger after his creation was definitively destroyed in the 6th film 3 years before. Now, similar to the original film's credits, we see the creation of the infamous glove that Freddy uses to slash his unlucky victims. Now, the main difference in this entry, though, is that the claws are being attached to what looks like an animatronic or robotic hand, and our Freddy is going to use this mechanical hand after he cuts his own hand off. And that's when we see that this is a movie set. Heather Langenkamp who was the original Nancy in the first film and returned in the third film, this time playing herself, is on set with her son Dylan and her husband Chase. The guy who created the Freddy hand animatronic is Chase. He is a special effects prop guy for movies. And they are filming a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Things go a little kooky on set when the hand seemingly begins to move on its own and cuts Chase's finger before coming to life and slashing another prop guy's throat. As the animatronic slices through people on set, Dylan goes missing. The clawed hand then attacks and kills Chase before an earthquake wakes Heather and the rest of her family up in their beds, safe from all of that crazy nightmare business. However, Chase still does have blood on his fingers from where Heather dreamed that he was sliced by the animatronic creation. So, here's how we create a brand new Freddy Krueger nightmare. It's meta horror. Like I said, Heather Langenkamp is a character she herself is playing in a world that mirrors the real world. As I said, she starred in Wes Craven's smash hit, Nightmare on Elm Street, and she's still best known for that in her career. And in the world of this movie, that is what she's known for. Her husband works on horror props in this movie. Now, she was married at the time. I don't think that she was married to a Hollywood guy, but in this she is, because it helps set up the drama that will follow this shortly. And she is still friends and in contact with actors Robert Englund, who is in this decidedly nothing like his Freddy character. She still has contact with Wes Craven, but sometimes she still gets haunted by the dreams of working on these movies. Also, Dylan is starting to make weird, scary faces in his breakfast oatmeal in the morning. So it's clear that it's kind of spilling over to him in a, I think, sort of metatextual way of saying how kids get affected by the popularity of horror films of the 80s in particular. And it was almost like you couldn't avoid being exposed to the movies, particularly Freddy Krueger, at this time. But Heather gets a phone call with a spooky voice telling her that Freddy is coming for her. But today isn't the first time she's gotten a call like that. It's a stalker that ends up calling her off and on throughout the last at least several months, if not years. Dylan is also saying creepy things after being practically entranced by the original Nightmare on the kitchen TV and going into a screaming fit when she turns it off. While Chase goes off to work on I believe it was a series of commercials or something, Heather goes to an interview to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. The interviewer, who was a real KTLA celebrity or TV personality, I should say, at the time, asks a bunch of intrusive questions about her life, about the franchise now that it's ostensibly over, and whether or not she would trust Robert Englund with her little boy before bringing Englund out dressed as Freddy and just having a blast with the audience, who has several members dressed as Freddy as well, which makes Heather uneasy. On the way out of the interview, she gets a call from New Line Cinema to meet with Bob Shea, who also appears in this movie playing himself, with a proposal to bring Freddy and Nancy and the whole Nightmare franchise back for one final definitive movie. Wes Craven hasn't been making horror movies because he hasn't had any nightmares, but now he suddenly got the inspiration back to write a new Freddy movie. Now, Wes has been working on the script for the last couple of months. Ever since he started, Wes, Bob, and Heather have all had strange nightmares, and she's had strange phone calls about Freddy. And on top of that, secretly behind her back, Chase has been working on a new animatronic Freddy glove, just like in her nightmare. Dylan is also having strange seizures that are like nightmares, with his stuffed dinosaur getting claw marks on it as if it was attacked by Freddy. Later that night, Dylan tells Heather that his dinosaur Rex keeps the mean old man with the claws at the end of his bed and guards him, and that it's quote unquote different when she isn't there with him. At the same time as when Heather tucks little Dylan into bed, Chase is hurrying home because of the episode Dylan had earlier in the day, but he's struggling to stay awake because he had to drive to this job several hours out of town. Now, as he tries to keep himself awake, a set of claws come up from the seat and attacks him, causing him to drive off the road and wreck. But it appears to all be a nightmare of Heather's, but after Dylan wakes up also saying that Rex woke him up fighting the man with the claws, the police arrive to deliver the news that Chase is dead. When she goes to see Chase's body, she sees that he did indeed have claw marks on his chest all the way down to his stomach. And at his funeral, Heather believes that she sees Dylan being dragged under the earth by Freddy himself, but apparently she's the only one who saw this because she was knocked out of her graveside chair by another massive earthquake and took a bump on the head that she had to be basically told that whatever she thought she saw clearly had to do something with that bump that she took. Now, attacks on Heather and Dylan start to intensify. Dylan says he hears kids in his bed reciting the old nursery rhyme about Freddy that was heard so many times in the previous movies. The TV, even while not plugged in, shows Dylan scenes from the original Nightmare movie, and he tells Heather that the man with the claws is trying to come up into their world. Later, Heather goes to talk to actor John Saxon, who played her father in the Nightmare movies, and he tries to help her feel better about how she is not seeing the things she thinks she sees or connecting to her nightmares. She reveals that she did have a family member who died in an insane asylum. And while she talks to him, Dylan climbs to the top of a playground jungle gym and falls, being caught just in time by Heather. She then calls Robert and tells him about the dreams about Freddy, except it isn't the Freddy he played for years. He guesses correctly that this Freddy is darker and more evil. And we then see that he is working on a pretty nasty and gruesome painting showing that he too has been haunted by the darker and more evil version of Freddy. Dylan's episodes get worse, as do the phone calls Heather gets from what she still thinks is a stalker, but is likely actually this more demonic Freddy. She takes Dylan to the hospital where the doctor thinks that it might be signs of childhood schizophrenia. And while Dylan is in the hospital getting tests run on him, Heather tries to find some answers. She first tries calling Robert, but he and his wife have skipped town and plan to be away for, quote, some time. She then goes to see Wes Craven, who tells her about the script and his nightmares. He says that there's this entity that needs to keep going through stories. If the stories continue, the entity becomes trapped in them. Since the movies ended, the entity is now loose and has taken the form of Freddy and emulates the monster's actions and motivations. This entity got used to playing the role of Freddy in these scripts. But there is a gatekeeper in Craven's dreams, and that gatekeeper is Heather. The entity thinks Heather is her character Nancy, and it will try to move into our reality through her. The only way Wes Craven thinks can stop this entity is to make one more movie. And he'll work on the script for however long it takes to finish it, but it will be up to Heather to stop this entity from crossing over into the real world. That night, after Nancy learns of more deaths of people connected to her now dead husband's prop crew, the people that we saw get killed by the animatronic at the beginning of the movie, Heather is attacked by the entity who looks sort of like Freddy Krueger, but he's more sinewy and almost kind of skeletal in some ways, as opposed to just being somebody with burnt flesh. He refers to her as Nancy before disappearing. Heather rushes to the hospital to see Dylan, where she finds Julie, who is Dylan's regular babysitter, who also had a bad feeling that something wrong is happening at the hospital with Dylan. That night at the hospital, everything comes to a head when Heather has a nightmare of Freddy speaking through Dylan to say that he is almost here. Elsewhere, the nurses at the hospital give Dylan a sedative while Heather is detained and questioned about her mental health. Julie tries to keep Dylan awake but is unsuccessful, and as he starts to drift off to sleep, the Freddy demon comes into the real world and kills Julie. But no one but Dylan can see the entity, and she's dragged around the room until she is dead. Very similar to how the first death is shown in the original movie. It's has her being pulled up through, up the wall, up to the ceiling before she's eventually dropped and killed. Now, by the time Heather gets to the room Julie and Dylan were in, Dylan's gone. She finds him climbing up to the freeway to try to cross it because their home is actually just on the other side of the freeway from the hospital. But he's kind of sleepwalking and trying to escape Freddy, who he sees in the sky. And Freddy even lifts him up over the cars and semi-trucks that nearly hit him with his claws. He's almost keeping him alive to lure what he believes is Nancy to him. Now, she eventually gets home to find Dylan there with John Saxon. But while they talk, John begins to call her Nancy, and he's dressed as a cop like he played in the original Nightmare. Meanwhile, in Dylan's room, the Freddy entity is coming up through Dylan's bed, and when Heather decides to play along and treat John as her father, the Freddy entity crosses over completely. The outside of their house even starts to look like the original Elm Street house from the first movie. Inside, she discovers Dylan has left a way for her to join him in the dream world to fight the Freddy demon on his own turf. Just like his favorite story, Hansel and Gretel, Dylan's left a trail of not breadcrumbs, but sleeping pills for her to follow. She goes into the demon dream world for her final battle with the Freddy entity. He chases both Heather and Dylan through various hallways in this kind of twisted boiler room like you would have seen in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. He nearly gets Dylan until Heather is able to get him off the boy and shoves him into an incinerator. The Freddy entity is burned until it explodes, allowing Heather and Dylan to return to the conscious world, freed from the monster. Heather finds a script from Wes Craven thanking her for playing Nancy one last time to put Freddy back where he belongs. Heather then begins to read the script to Dylan, which is retelling the entire movie that we just watched. Now, let's talk about 3 things I like about Wes Craven's new Nightmare. First, when I first saw this movie in 1995 on home video, because I didn't see it in the theater due to not really being a huge Freddy fan, even in my teenage years, but this was the first time that I think I was ever exposed to the idea of meta horror. Hell, it might have even been the first time I ever saw anything meta in movies at all. Heather Langenkamp is Heather Langenkamp in this. Robert Englund is Robert Englund. Wes Craven is Wes Craven. They're all being haunted and spooked out by Wes Craven's own creation, a demon that manifested itself into pop culture as Freddy Krueger. It's a whole new take on telling a spooky story. It plays a little bit with how a role can affect someone in positive and negative ways. The previous entries in the series exist in this world, and the most enduring protagonist is haunted by it. I mentioned earlier that this was a test run for Craven to bring horror into the quote-unquote real world, as he did with Scream, which used slasher movie concepts to attack and kill the characters in that movie's concept of that real world. This goes one step further by saying the creature that Craven created is something of a demonic figure that influenced his creation as he writes Freddy. That demon is actually coming through into the real world. And it's such a powerful force, this creature's return creates earthquakes. It's a neat take, and it makes the movie smarter than any of the other sequels in this franchise. It was probably even the smartest movie, including the first one. Now, second, I like that we only get little bits of pieces of Freddy for about an hour plus of this movie until he finally makes his big splash in the final act. For the most part, this is not a slasher movie. This is not really a Freddy Krueger movie. This is a family drama. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about something that deals specifically with Heather Langenkamp in her real life in just a moment. But in this movie, she talks about having real concerns about something in her life to John Saxon about having a history of mental illness in her family. And she worries that she's passing it down to Dylan. Dylan, while in the hospital, creates a situation in which any parent would fear, a scenario in which she could not protect him or help him with the problems that he's facing. Worse, one of the nurses tells the doctor that she doesn't think Heather allows Dylan to have a decent night of sleep ever, which places a lot of blame onto her. But they also believe Dylan might be suffering from childhood schizophrenia, so it's possible that she's passed her family issues with mental health onto him. Between her having nightmares, losing her husband, seeing her son have these issues that she can't help him with, etc., this is not a Nightmare on Elm Street, a typical Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Instead, this is a family drama horror. It's deeper than the surface stuff with Freddy. And while that does have an effect on Heather's life, she is terrified that she can't protect her son, and it causes her life to spiral. There's a way to tell the same story without the Freddy demon being a real threat and a specter based on mental illness, or even go one step further and say this is a representation of trauma. So there's a whole story here running along the possible Freddy problem. And when Freddy finally manifests in the hospital to kill Julie, that is a fantastic scene. That's a big moment in the whole movie. You can see him fully, even though you saw his face prior to the scene. But it really is his big coming out moment, and it comes comes into this an hour into the runtime. And it allows for all the other stuff to needle away at you. And I think that's Wes Craven being really smart with his writing and letting his characters sell the horror story. And third, that brings us to Heather Langenkamp herself. She is fantastic in this movie. In fact, I think it's one of the greatest lead performances of any final girl in any horror movie. She's playing more or less herself as a mother. In 1994, she was already a mother of a boy named Daniel, who was about 2 years old at the time this movie was released. Sadly, Daniel did pass away in 2018 at the age of 26 from a brain tumor, but still, at the time, she was mostly known and is still known today for being Nancy in the original A Nightmare on Elm Street movie. She did attract the attention of a crazed fan who stalked and called her as portrayed in this movie. And to get away from this, she, for a time, had to move to England. She uses all of this in the movie for the role of this kind of metatextual version of herself in 1993 or 1994. Sometimes it's often a joke when someone plays themselves. I mean, I think about the buffoon version of William Shatner in the movie Free Enterprise, but not here. She's playing a version of herself, but as a character who has experiences aligning with her own, having a husband, having a family, having to deal with always being known for one thing, having a stalker that creates nightmares for her. And because of that alignment with her experiences, this becomes a very strong performance. She's also outright told she has to be the hero here. In Nightmare 1, she figured out a plan to bring Freddy into the real world and uses her smarts to trap him so that she can get rid of him. In Nightmare 3, she has experience to help the other kids at the institution that she's gotten the job at to deal with Freddy. Here, everything is foisted upon her because she is ostensibly the real Heather Langenkamp and not a character with a plot and a script that she is reading and performing named Nancy. There is a script, but she doesn't know what it contains and doesn't have any power over it. It basically is her summoning courage to save her son. And it's really good stuff and a great performance. And to be honest with you, of the 3 Nightmare on Elm Street movies she's appeared in, this should be the one that she's best remembered for, because it is the full circle culmination of everything that Nancy was and who she is as a person, as the actress playing Nancy. It's really good. And every time I watch this movie, I become more impressed with her performance in it. So definitely the main thing that I like about this movie. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch a new episode of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. But also don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Mondays show at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we're going to spend the entirety of June putting to rest the Gamera series, and we start by looking at the 7th film in the original series, 1971's Gamera vs. Zigra. So until next week, stay spooky.